Hello, Alan Rule here. The Crusades have been um, they've been all over social media lately. I don't know how it started, but James White got into the thick of it, and it has spurned a discussion. Of course, James White absolutely hates the Crusades, and James White likes to gloat that he teaches church history and has for 30 plus years. I question his knowledge of church history. I'm not saying he doesn't know anything, but everything he does know is from modern scholarship, and I don't think he's ever cracked a primary source. Like, like I honestly wonder how much primary sources he's read in pre-Reformation church history. I I honestly question that. And so, of course, the Crusades are an important part of church history. And it's so easy to just say, oh, they were bloodthirsty and they were uncivilized and stuff. And there are certainly downsides of the Crusades, like there's downsides of every war. Um, but the truth is, there's to learn something, you have to go through all the things. So I've criticized James White for not using primary sources. Let me tell you the difference between primary sources and reading modern scholars or historians from the 19th and 20th century. Say you're going to go to Paris, and you have two ways to see Paris. One, you could take a tour by helicopter. You could fly over Paris, you could see the Seine, you could see the Eiffel Tower, Arc de Triomphe, you can see the Louvre, Notre Dame Cathedral. What's that white church on uh, the hill? Sacre Coeur. You could see um, tons of museums, D'Orsay. You can see them everywhere. That's the chopper tour, but you see them from above and you kind of see, okay. And perhaps, your pilots, pointing out why certain things are important or, yeah. So, you can see the Eiffel Tower, the soccer stadium, like all of that is there. That's one way to see it. Or you can walk on the ground in the streets of Paris uh, and see everything up close and know things intimately. It's going to take a bit longer. You can do an easy tour of the city in the chopper in an hour, but an hour, you're not going to see as much on foot. You're going to have to take probably a few days on foot to see all the important stuff. But what you do see, you understand way better. This is my analogy for primary sources versus modern scholars. Um, it's a completely different experience, and James White and most people online don't use primary sources. And some people have asked me in the midst of this crusade talk, what primary sources do you recommend? In fact, Javier Perdomo, he asked me specifically for the first four crusades. And so I'm going to give my primary sources that I use for the first four crusades. Like sometimes they're not always crusades. It might be a Byzantine history that includes the crusades because they interacted, or it might be a biography of a king who went on a crusade, but the king biography is his whole life, not just a crusade, things like that. But I'm going to show you what I use. I want you to just ask yourself next time you hear James White talking about how he teaches church history, if he does this. So the first crusade is Fulcher of Chartres. That's Fulcher of Chartres. That's in France. And he gives 1095 from the start of the First Crusade. The First Crusade ends in 1099. And it goes to 1127. So you don't not only, it's not just the First Crusade, you also get the first 25, 30 years of the Crusader states. So that's a lot of information here. It's not that expensive. Um, and yeah, it's a good read. And he was part of the chaplain on the Crusade, and this is one of the most important primary sources of the First Crusade. So, yeah, there you go. And if you had to read one First Crusade book, only one, this would be the one to read. And as I said, it follows the Crusader states to 1127. So start here, Fulcher of Chartres, his history of the expedition to Jerusalem, 1095 to 1127. Okay, so that's where to start. Second is another chronicle, Robert the Monk. He did something very similar, chronicled, follow along the First Crusade. There are some people who say, oh, in the First Crusade, they killed all the Muslims inside the city. That abomination Kingdom of Heaven says that. But in this, it talks about how the Muslims who survived were told by the Crusaders to take the corpses of the dead Muslims out, implying there were still Muslims alive, because you can't really do that unless there are still Muslims alive. So this is another chronicle. Pretty much the same stuff as Fulcher of Chartres. A few more details on some stuff, few less details on other stuff. All right, now we have a Byzantine source. This is the Alexiad by Anna Komnena, the daughter of Alexius Comnenus, who was the Byzantine emperor during the First Crusade. He was the emperor from 1081 to 1118. A very good emperor. And this is a biography. It's long. It's almost 500 pages. Pretty good for something from that time. And it's written by a female too. But it's his whole life. It's not just the Crusade, although it's a good source for the Crusades, because the Crusades go over his land. And it's a great chronicle. And in addition, it's a very enjoyable read. It's very well written. You learn a lot, and it's a fun read too. Her writing style is kind of funny. It's published by Penguin, so it's obviously pretty cheap. You can get this for about $20 Canadian. I don't know what that is in American, 15 or something. Now, the next is a collection of writings. It's got part of the Chronicle of Fulcher of Chartres, actually, but we've taken care of that. The good thing about this one is it has parts from Jewish writings, because a lot of people, when they like to criticize the First Crusade, they said, a whole bunch of crusaders went into the Rhineland and attacked Jewish communities there. And that's true. That did unfortunately happen. But they give the Jewish account of these attacks in here, written by Jews. And it talks about how the bishops tried to protect the Jews. In fact, I believe it was the Bishop of Speyer, the Jew called him a righteous among the nations for trying to save the Jews. That's a kind of an honorary title that Jews give to righteous Gentiles, like, for example, ones who saved Jews during the Holocaust. They're known as the righteous among the nations. Well, they referred to, I believe it was the Bishop of Speyer, who was trying to save the Jewish community, and I think saved a lot of them in Speyer in the Rhineland. But there's several accounts. So yeah, go pick those up. Now let's move on to the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade, I don't really have any specific chronicles about it. Now I do have sources for it, because like you have to try to take some from here, some from there. I'll tell you where to go. Get the Damascus Chronicle. It's an Islamic account, actually, and it's a pretty good account. It goes from about 1095 to 1160. And so it's contemporary with the events of the Second Crusade, which started in the 1140s. He recaps the First Crusade as well, but just spends a few pages on it. It's not too much of a source. And again, it's an Islamic account. And it's it's quite good. Now, the second book is one that's going to come up again for the Second and Third Crusade. It's the Annals of Nicetas Cunyatus, and he is a Byzantine chronicler, and he gives a Byzantine account of 3 crusades: second, third, and fourth. He's especially important for the fourth because I'll explain as soon as we get there. But he probably was not alive or just a kid when the Second Crusade happened, but he does give a bit Byzantine perspective, gives a lot of details about King Louis VII of France and the stuff he does when crossing the Byzantine Empire. So this is important too, and this is going to come up again. More than once it's going to come up. Okay. Now we're moving on to the Third Crusade. Now, to the Crusade historian Thomas Madden once described the Third Crusade as the Super Bowl of Crusades because it's got all the big names in it. You've got Saladin on the Muslim side. You got Richard the Lionheart on the Christian side. You have King Philip II and Frederick I, who went overland. King Richard and King Philip took the sea route. Frederick took overland. All right, here's one. The conquest of Jerusalem and the Third Crusade. This is a chronicle of the events that led up to the Third Crusade and the Third Crusade, for like Saladin, like the stuff you see in Kingdom of Heaven. Saladin taking back Jerusalem. Although that movie's an abomination, it's terrible. And yeah, so here is and it talks about the stuff that happens in the years prior to that. And it does talk about the Third Crusade as well. So very important, the conquest of Jerusalem and the Third Crusade. So you need those primary sources. Next, the Chronicle of the Third Crusade, the Gesta Regis Ricardi. This is the one you want to read. It's 400 pages, very thorough. Goes from beginning to end. It's from the point of view of Richard. It's not written by him, but someone close to him, and it's absolutely brilliant. The Battle of Arsuf, Battle of Jaffa, important battles where he defeats Saladin. And and the next source I'm going to show you, it complements that one very well. So this. And again, if you're going to read one on the Third Crusade, it's this one. Okay. The next one, an Islamic source, the rare and excellent history of Saladin. So it's written by Bahauddin ibn Shaddad. It's written by one of Saladin's scribes. And of course, Saladin fought against Richard. And it's ironic, in these two sources, they cover a lot of the same material, and it's amazing how much is corroborated. Like the battles, like the Battle of Jaffa is just fascinating because the Crusaders were so few in number, but pull out the victory. And like they talk about the same things, and you get to learn a lot about Saladin, how the Muslims viewed the Crusaders and stuff. A great primary source on the life of Saladin and the events of the Third Crusade. The next document I have, the Deeds of Philip Augustus. This is Philip II of France, who was on the Crusade. This is a biography of his whole life. So it's not just the Crusade; it's before and after the Crusade as well. But the Crusade's important. So yeah. It's not the most useful in the world. It's more, you buy this one more if you're going to like understand, you're trying to learn about France and stuff, but it does have some Crusade stuff as well here. And it's quite good. This talks about the Saladin tithe. There was a tithe called the Saladin tithe to raise money for the Crusades to take back Jerusalem. So, all right, now we have one more for the Third Crusade. No, there's two more actually, because that one's going to come up again. The Crusade of Frederick Barbarossa. So this is the primary chronicle of the history of the expedition of Emperor Frederick. The primary chronicle that details his account of the Crusade, and he died on the Crusade. Actually, he drowned in a river in Anatolia. And so, this is what you want to read about his part of the Crusade. And of course, on the Christian side, there was a lot of infighting, and these people don't like Richard the Lionheart at all, even though he was the hero of the Third Crusade. So yeah, so there's 5 books right there, and of course, this baby again, O City of Byzantium, the Annals of Nicetas Choniates. And it you get to learn a lot about the crazy guy who took over Cyprus, because that was the first conquest of the Third Crusade. They go to Cyprus and take it because the renegade ruler there had separated himself from the Byzantine Empire and declared Cyprus an autonomous state, and he starts abducting ships, crusader ships. Then Richard the Lionheart goes and takes the island from him. And this, you get in this account, you get to learn a lot about that guy. That guy was crazy. His name's Isaac Comnenus. He was absolutely nuts. If you read like the main Crusader Chronicles, they talk about him, but they don't tell you a whole lot about him. You learn a lot about him in here. He was whacked. So yeah. All right. That is the Third Crusade. Let me just... All right, now the Fourth Crusade, my specialty. I wrote a 5,000-word an article on the Fourth Crusade when I was in for 1 Peter 5. Okay. Here is the first chronicle to read. It's Geoffroy de Villehardouin. Geoffroy de Villehardouin. And if you buy this edition, it comes with 2 Crusade Chronicles. The first one is Geoffroy de Villehardouin, who was, I believe, the Marshal of Champagne. He was one of the admins on the Crusade, so he's very good at giving all the admin details, how much everything costs and stuff like that, and how many people they were trying to get the Venetians to transport for. He's very good with that. And so, yeah, it's by Penguin and it's cheap. But the second chronicle you get in here is of the 7th and 8th Crusade of King Louis IX. So you get that as a bonus as well in here. And again, it's cheap. It's Penguin. Penguin's cheap. All right. Second account of the Fourth Crusade. Robert of Clary. He was a knight on the Crusade. So he's like, well, Geoffroy de Villehardouin is very good for the Geoffroy de Villehardouin is good for the admin stuff. He's good for the battles because he fought in the battles and he kind of gives you a close-up view of the battles. Next, we got Gunther of Paris. It's kind of a lesser-known account of the Third Crusade. It's fairly cheap. Or the Fourth Crusade, sorry. It's fairly cheap, and there's some good details in here. Then there is this, O City of Byzantium, Annals of Nicetas Choniates. He was in the city when it was sacked, because he's a Greek. He's a Byzantine. He was in Constantinople when it was attacked, and he gives the details of what happened. So very important source to corroborate with the those 3 sources. And one last source, it's a collection of some smaller chronicles and the correspondence with the Pope. This is the most expensive book I've ever purchased. I only bought it because I had some cash come my way that I was not expecting. I'm like, I might as well buy that. I don't recommend buying this though. And to be honest, unless you plan on writing a book on the Fourth Crusade, uh, the stuff here is, I mean, it's interesting, but it's a lot of correspondence with the Pope, because during the Fourth Crusade, they're constantly in contact with the Pope, updating him on the situation and all that stuff. And if you're going to read one book on the Fourth Crusade, Geoffroy de Villehardouin, Cheap and Good. Cheap and Good. So if you're going to read one, that's the one. So that's all of my the first four Crusade, the primary sources I've read, and I plan on reading more. There's still more chronicles on the First Crusade, and there's so much more. And when James White always talks about studying church history, when he makes that claim, just ask him. Just think: has he done this? Has he done this kind of research? And this is the research I do for every episode of church history I study, whether that be the Gregorian reforms. I have a ton of primary sources, the 100 Years' War, the Reformation, the early church, you name it. This is what I do. And so if we want to talk about some other event in church history, I would have a ton of primary sources as well, because that's what I do. I walk in the streets of Paris. I don't have the chopper tour. Yes, it takes a bit longer, but it is worth it. Let me show you two more books completely unrelated to church history. One is The Mutiny on the Bounty. In I believe it was 1789. Yeah. In 1789, Captain William Bligh, there was a mutiny led by a guy named Fletcher Christian on the Bounty, which was a ship that was sailing from England to an island in the Pacific to plant trees, to take some trees and plant them. And there was a mutiny, and Captain Bligh and some other people were put in a small boat, and they had to find an island to go to. They eventually made their way back to England. And so here's an account of it, and it's written by William Bligh, the captain. He wrote this as soon as he got back. So if I'm studying non-church history stuff, I study the primary sources too. Let me give you one more. The Red Battle Flyer by Manfred Freiherr von Richthofen. Who is that? That's in World War I. He was known as the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. He was a baron, and he wrote a book during the war that was published shortly before he died, actually. And it's fascinating. You get to learn about the life of one of the greatest pilots of all time, written by one of the greatest pilots of all time. So, that's how I do history. So, if you're going to learn history from someone, just ask yourself, have they done this kind of work? Have they done this kind of work? And to be honest, I don't think James White has. So he's attacking the Crusades, and all he knows is what modern Protestant historians have written about them. I would be genuinely shocked if James White has read any of the books I've showed here. Just one. I bet he hasn't read one. He reads modern Protestants. All right, so those are my sources for the first four Crusades. Again, I could do this for any topic, including the rest of the Crusades. Fifth Crusade, you got to get Oliver of Paderborn. I could go on. But that's enough. So enough to get you guys to start reading. And if you got any more questions, leave them in the comments. God bless.